Hey there, golfers and golfettes. Tom Saguto here with your weekly e-tip, and this week I'm talking about the takeaway. There's two different types of takeaways, and I want to show you which one that you might prefer and why you might use a certain takeaway. The two takeaways are, one, we have the early wrist hinge takeaway, and two, we've got the quiet, not really using so much the wrist takeaway. And why does this matter? Well, the takeaway is the first 3 feet of the golf swing, and it often sets up the rest of your swing for everything else that's going to happen. So if you get the first 3 feet down correctly, you get the rest of the swing out of the way. It's a lot simpler. Alright, so takeaway number one, the early wrist set. Something you need to know about this takeaway, this is more in line with what we talked about recently with the right forearm. So if you like to get the right forearm set early, start folding that right forearm up like this early to get it in a power position, I'm going to recommend takeaway number one, which is this early wrist set. And it's not like we're using our wrists actively. We're not trying to use our wrists here. It's just a result of getting the club or getting your right forearm in this type of position top. So from the start of the swing, you begin making that same motion with your right forearm, and it looks like there's an early wrist hinge. And it is an early wrist hinge if you're loading the wrists earlier than you would normally without that. If you're doing this type of takeaway where there's no wrists, you're just loading them earlier, you're loading the right forearm earlier. So this might help you out if you're working on this right forearm and you want to get that just out of the way and done with. So once you set it, you can forget it. Now takeaway number two, we don't set the wrist so early, and then we get the forearm figured out later on. This takeaway is better for players that are really handsy. And by handsy, I mean you have difficulty controlling the club face. So if you're getting the club face back in the takeaway and it's rolling open and it's too shut, you're hitting it left, right, all over the place, this is a good takeaway to get the club face square here, then load it, and then hit the golf ball. So that's why it matters. It matters so that you can have more control over your golf shots. Takeaway number one, this is better for the player who doesn't really worry about the hands so much, but they want to get themselves in a good backswing position without thinking about the wrists. Especially if you're one of those players that has a hard time getting a good wrist hinge. This will help set it early. As long as you know that you're not hinging the wrists, you're just using the right forearm. The right forearm's taking care of that. So I figured I'd clear up some confusion and help give you a couple options when working on this in your swing. So I'm going to put both those swings to the test here, and you're going to check them out right here. Alright, here we have wrist hinge one, which is the early hinge of the right forearm, using the right forearm like this. It's easier to load the forearm this way, making it easier for you to get into a top of backswing position that takes care of business. But then I'll also demonstrate position number two. So here comes position number one. And lastly, position number two. That felt good. Position number two, which is a later hinge. This is best for the handsy golfers out there. You know who you are. So you're taking the club back with no hinge in the beginning and then loading the right forearm after that. Tiger Woods is a good example of this. This later hinge. He takes it here, loads it, hits. Here we go. Later hinge. Alright, golfers and golfettes, thank you for tuning in. Glad you're able to see the difference between two takeaways. One, using the right forearm more, that early wrist set that appears to be. It's really just the right forearm loading and unloading. Unloading in the downswing, loading in the backswing, unloading here. And then the other takeaway, which is taking it back without really loading it quite yet until here, then loading it. And both can be employed successfully. It just matters on what type of golfer you are. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Hope you have a rocking week, and I'll see you on the range.